The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal gardens of Kepler 442b, its golden light dancing through the transparent spires that housed the Zilani civilization. For 3,000 years, the Zilani had lived in perfect peace on their agricultural world, their society built on harmony with nature and the gentle cultivation of the galaxy's most precious crops. Elder Vashitai stood on the highest platform of the Central Harmony Tower, watching the floating gardens drift slowly across the blue sky. The Zilani were a tall, graceful species with pale green skin and large, compassionate eyes that reflected the wisdom of generations. Their cities grew like living things, shaped from living crystal that responded to their touch and thoughts. That peaceful morning shattered when the first hegemony ships appeared in the sky like dark stars falling from heaven. The ships were massive, angular vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved with predatory purpose, their weapon systems already charging as they descended toward the planet's surface. The hegemony empire had been expanding across this sector of the galaxy for decades, consuming worlds and enslaving populations to fuel their endless war machine. They were a militaristic species called the Korth, with thick armored hides and small, cruel eyes that saw other beings only as resources to be exploited. Their ships carried advanced weapons and shields, technology designed for conquest and domination. The first bombardment began without warning. Plasma cannons tore through the crystal spires, shattering them into glowing fragments that rained down on the gardens below. The Zilani had no military defenses, no weapons of war. Their entire civilization was based on growth and creation, not destruction. Elder Vashitai rushed to the emergency communications center as the tower shook around him. Younger Zilani worked frantically at the organic computers, their hands glowing as they interfaced with the living systems. "Send the distress signals across all frequencies," Vashitai commanded, his voice steady despite the fear in his large eyes. "Tell the galaxy what is happening here." The SOS signals raced across space at faster-than-light speeds, carrying desperate pleas for help to every major civilization in the galaxy. The messages were simple but heartbreaking. "This is Kepler 442b. We are under attack by the hegemony empire. We are a peaceful people with no defenses. Please help us. Anyone who can hear this, please help us." The signals reached the Galactic Council first, the massive space station that served as the political center of known space. Representatives from dozens of species debated in their great chambers while the Zilani died. The Altarians, proud and honor-bound, argued that military intervention would violate territorial sovereignty. The logical synthetics calculated that the cost of intervention exceeded the potential benefits. Hours passed as the debates continued. The Mercantile Union worried about trade route disruptions. The Ethereal Collective spoke of cosmic balance and non-interference. Every major power found reasons to avoid action, hiding behind bureaucracy and protocol while a peaceful civilization burned. On Kepler 442b, hegemony ground forces had landed and begun the systematic destruction of Zilani settlements. The invaders used massive mining machines to strip away the crystal cities, harvesting the rare minerals within. Zilani civilians were herded into transport ships, destined for slave labor in hegemony factories on distant worlds. Young Zilani tried to shield their elders as plasma weapons carved through their ranks. Families were torn apart as the strongest were selected for slavery, while the weak were simply left to die. The beautiful floating gardens crashed to earth, their crystal matrices shattered and bleeding light into the poisoned soil. Elder Vashitai managed one final transmission before Korth soldiers broke down the doors to the communications center. His voice, transmitted across the galaxy, carried the weight of a dying civilization. "To anyone listening, we offered only friendship to the galaxy. We asked for nothing but the right to live in peace. Remember us. Remember that we tried to live with love instead of fear." The transmission cut to static as the tower fell. Across the galaxy, the major powers received the final message and filed it away as another tragedy in a universe full of conflicts they chose not to see. The Galactic Council passed a resolution expressing deep concern for the situation and calling for a fact-finding mission to be organized within 6 standard months, but the signals had traveled farther than the civilized core worlds. They had reached the rim territories, the frontier systems where life was harder and help was rare. In one small blue-green world orbiting a yellow star, primitive radio receivers picked up the desperate calls for aid. The inhabitants of this world had been largely ignored by galactic civilization, dismissed as violent primitives on a dangerous death world. On Earth, in the command centers of the newly formed United Defense Fleet, Admiral Sarah Chen listened to the recordings of Zilani distress calls. The translation algorithms had worked through the night to decode the alien language, revealing the full horror of what had happened. Chen was a veteran of the Martian conflicts and the asteroid mining wars, a woman who had seen enough death to understand its weight. "Ma'am," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving similar distress patterns from 3 other systems in that sector. The hegemony appears to be conducting a systematic campaign of conquest. Intelligence estimates they've enslaved or eliminated over 2 million beings in the past month alone." Chen stared at the tactical display showing the distant star systems. Earth's fleet was small compared to the major galactic powers, their ships built from salvaged alien technology and human innovation. They had been exploring and trading in the outer systems for only 50 years, barely noticed by the galaxy's established civilizations, but they had received the call for help, and they understood something the civilized galaxy seemed to have forgotten. "Send word to all fleet commanders," Chen ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made hard decisions before. "Recall all ships from exploration and trade missions. Begin immediate mobilization of reserve fleets, and contact the civilian shipping guilds. Tell them we may need every ship that can carry weapons and life support." Her second-in-command, Commander James Rourke, looked up from his station with concern. "Admiral, our long-range scouts report the hegemony has at least 3 battle fleets in that sector. Our entire navy is maybe a quarter of their size, and most of our ships are converted civilian vessels. This could be a suicide mission." Chen turned to face the bridge crew, seeing the fear and uncertainty in their eyes. These were explorers and traders, scientists and engineers who had volunteered to push humanity's boundaries into space. They had signed up to discover new worlds, not to fight wars against galactic empires. But they had also heard the Zilani's final transmission, the Elder's words about living with love instead of fear. "The galaxy calls us Deathworlders," Chen said quietly. "They think we're nothing but violent primitives who fight over scraps in the outer rim. Maybe they're right about the violent part. But if being from a death world means we don't abandon innocent people to slavers and murderers, then I'll wear that name with pride." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of computers and life support systems. In that silence, something fundamental shifted in humanity's relationship with the galaxy. They were no longer trying to prove themselves worthy of acceptance by the civilized powers. They were choosing their own path, one that led toward a distant star system where innocent beings needed help that no one else was willing to provide. "Begin fleet mobilization," Chen commanded, "and send a message to the hegemony forces in the Kepler system. Tell them that Earth has received the Zilani distress calls, and we are coming to render assistance. They should consider this their only warning to withdraw." As the message raced across space toward the Kepler system, Chen knew it would be intercepted by monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. The major powers would learn that the primitive Deathworlders were mobilizing for war against an empire that could crush them. Some would laugh at human arrogance, others would calculate the political implications. But none would act to help. That was exactly what Chen was counting on. Humanity would answer the call alone, as they always had. And if they died trying to save people they had never met, at least they would die as themselves, not as supplicants begging for acceptance from a galaxy that had forgotten what honor meant. The message from Earth reached the hegemony command ship Dominator's Fist 12 hours after Admiral Chen sent it. Warlord Krax, the Korth commander leading the Kepler 442b invasion, read the transmission with something between amusement and disbelief. The bridge crew of his massive dreadnought shared confused glances as their leader's thick hide rippled with what passed for Korth laughter. "A warning from the Deathworlders?" Krax growled, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the ship's hull. "These primitive humans dare to threaten the hegemony? Show me their fleet status." The holographic display showed Earth's known military assets, a collection of converted cargo ships, mining vessels, and a handful of purpose-built warships. Their total tonnage was less than a single hegemony battle group. Sub-Commander Vex, Krax's intelligence officer, pulled up additional data. "Warlord, the humans have been active in the Outer Rim for approximately 50 Earth years. They trade mostly in raw materials and simple manufactured goods. Our estimates suggest their total military strength is perhaps 20% of our forces in this sector alone. Krax dismissed the data with a wave of his armored hand. Desperate scavengers from a backwater world. Send a response telling them to stay in their own system if they value their miserable lives. We have work to finish here. Below them, the crystal cities of Kepler 442b continued to burn as hegemony forces completed their strip mining operations. But while the hegemony dismissed humanity as insignificant, something unprecedented was happening across human space. The call to mobilize had reached every human settlement from the Jupiter mining stations to the frontier colonies beyond Proxima Centauri. And humanity was responding with a unity that surprised even their own leaders. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the merchant vessel Mountain's Pride, a massive cargo hauler that normally carried ore from the asteroid belts to the inner system refineries. She had been unloading at Ceres Station when the mobilization order came through. Without hesitation, she contacted the modification crews and began converting her ship for war. Mount the plasma cannons on the forward cargo arms, she told Chief Engineer Marcus Webb. Strip out the luxury passenger quarters and install additional life support for a full marine company. And see if you can boost the reactor output by 20%. We're going to need every bit of speed and power we can get. Similar scenes played out across human space. The luxury cruise ship Stardancer had its observation decks fitted with missile launchers. The scientific research vessel Darwin's Dream received torpedo tubes and enhanced sensors. Even the ancient colony ship New Horizons, now serving as a mobile space station, prepared to join the fleet with its massive hull converted into a carrier for smaller vessels. Dr. Sarah Kim worked frantically in her laboratory aboard the research station Deep Thought, developing new weapon systems and defensive technologies. Humanity might be considered primitive by galactic standards, but they had learned to be creative with limited resources. Her team had developed plasma weapons that could punch through hegemony shields and armor configurations that could absorb energy weapon impacts. The key is unpredictability, Dr. Kim explained to her research team. The hegemony fights according to established galactic military doctrine. They expect certain types of weapons, certain tactical approaches, but we've never followed their rules because we've never been part of their system. That gives us an advantage if we're smart about using it. The mobilization was not just military. Human civilian organizations launched massive humanitarian efforts. Medical ships prepared emergency hospitals for refugees. Transport vessels loaded with food, water, and building materials prepared to assist in reconstruction efforts. Even children in school systems across human space organized supply drives, collecting everything from medical supplies to comfort items for displaced survivors. Commander Yuki Tanaka stood in the briefing room of the carrier New Terra, addressing the pilots of 3 fighter squadrons. These were not professional military pilots in the traditional sense. They were miners who had learned to fly in asteroid fields, freight runners who navigated dangerous shipping lanes, and exploration scouts who had mapped unknown star systems. But they all shared something the galaxy's professional militaries had lost: the willingness to risk everything for strangers. I won't lie to you, Tanaka told her pilots. The hegemony has better ships, better weapons, and more experience in large-scale warfare. But they've never faced pilots who learn to fly dodging asteroids at high speed, or who think ramming maneuvers are a viable tactical option. They fight by the book. We're going to throw the book out and make up our own rules. News of the human mobilization began reaching other species on the galactic rim. The Verdani, a peaceful agricultural species that had traded with humans for decades, offered to provide medical supplies and temporary shelter for refugees. The Cathari, nomadic traders who respected human determination, quietly provided intelligence about hegemony fleet movements in exchange for protection for their merchant caravans. But the core worlds of galactic civilization remained skeptical. Ambassador Tivar of the Altarian Republic sent a formal diplomatic message to Earth warning against reckless military adventurism that could destabilize the entire sector. The Synthetic Collective issued probability calculations showing a 94.7% chance of human defeat and subsequent hegemony expansion into human territory. President Maria Santos of the United Earth government read these messages in her office in Geneva. Earth. Through her window, she could see the lights of spacecraft launching from the orbital platforms, carrying young men and women toward a battle they might not survive. She had been elected to lead humanity into a peaceful future among the stars, not to send them to war against impossible odds. "Madam President," her chief of staff asked quietly, "the Galactic Council is offering to mediate a peaceful resolution. They suggest we could file a formal complaint about hegemony expansion and wait for the proper diplomatic channels to address the situation. It would take years, but it might save human lives." Santos turned from the window to face her aide. In her hands, she held a small crystal device given to her by the Zilani ambassador during their first diplomatic contact 3 years earlier. It was a memory crystal that contained recordings of Zilani poetry, music, and philosophy. The ambassador had called it a gift of friendship between peaceful peoples. Now the Zilani were gone, enslaved or dead, while the galaxy debated proper procedures. "The galaxy wants us to be patient," Santos said quietly. "To follow their rules, wait for their approval, beg for their permission to do what's right. But being human means we don't wait for permission to help people in need. Send a message to Admiral Chen. Tell her she has full authorization to proceed with the mission, and tell her that Earth stands behind our people whatever the cost." The authorization reached Admiral Chen as the first wave of human ships prepared to enter hyperspace. Her fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A chaotic mixture of military vessels, converted civilian ships, and volunteer spacecraft held together by determination and improvised engineering. They carried experimental weapons, untested technologies, and crews who had never fought together before. "Fleet status report," Chen requested from the bridge of her flagship, the heavy cruiser Indomitable. The ship had been built in the shipyards of Mars using a combination of human engineering and alien technology purchased from rim traders. It was not the most powerful ship in the galaxy, but it was tough, reliable, and crewed by people who understood that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. Commander Rourke read from his tactical display. "First wave consists of 43 ships of various classes, Admiral. Second wave will depart in 18 hours with the heavy transports and support vessels. Third wave is still assembling, but Captain Rodriguez reports that civilian volunteers are arriving faster than we can process them. The Mountain's Pride alone has over 200 volunteer crew members aboard." Chen nodded, feeling the weight of command settle on her shoulders. She had led military operations before, but never anything like this. This was not a battle for territory or resources or political advantage. This was a test of humanity's character, a choice between safety and honor that would define who they were in the galaxy's eyes and their own. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," she broadcast to the assembled fleet. "We are about to undertake the most important mission in human history. We go not as conquerors or liberators, but as people who heard a cry for help and chose to answer. Some of you are professional soldiers. Others are merchants, miners, farmers, and scientists. But today we are all human, and we carry with us the hopes of everyone who believes that good people should help each other when evil threatens innocent lives." The fleet formed up in hyperspace formation, each ship finding its place in the organized chaos of the human war armada. They were not the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, nor the most disciplined, nor the best equipped. But they were united by something the galaxy's major powers had forgotten: the simple belief that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were impossible. "Fleet," Chen commanded, "engage hyperspace drives. Destination, Kepler 442b. Let's go remind the galaxy what it means to be human." The human fleet vanished. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system like a swarm of angry insects. Admiral Chen studied the tactical display from the bridge of the Indomitable, watching as sensor data painted a picture of systematic destruction. 3 hegemony battle groups surrounded the planet, their massive dreadnoughts looking like metal parasites feeding on the dying world below. "Sensor report," Chen commanded. Commander Rourke worked over his console, his face grim as the data came in. "Admiral, we're detecting minimal life signs on the planet's surface. The hegemony has strip-mined most of the major population centers. Long-range scans show transport ships loaded with Zilani prisoners preparing to depart for the outer system." Chen felt anger burn cold in her chest. They were too late to save the Zilani civilization, but perhaps not too late to save the survivors. "Fleet communication," she ordered. The faces of her ship commanders appeared on multiple screens around the bridge. Captain Rodriguez of the Mountain's Pride, Commander Tanaka of the carrier New Terra, Captain Hassan of the destroyer Swift Justice, and dozens of others. The situation is worse than we hoped, Chen told them bluntly. The Zilani civilization is gone, but we count at least 50,000 survivors being loaded onto prison ships. Our mission is now search and rescue. We save who we can and we make the hegemony pay for what they've done here. The hegemony fleet had detected the human arrival and was beginning to form battle lines. Warlord Crack studied the approaching ships with a mixture of contempt and confusion. The human fleet looked like nothing he had ever seen. Converted cargo ships bristling with improvised weapons, sleek exploration vessels equipped with military sensors, and fighters that seemed to be built from spare parts and determination. They actually came, Sub-Commander Vex reported with disbelief. 43 ships of mixed classes. Our battle analysis computers are having difficulty categorizing their fleet composition because half their ships don't match any known military configurations. Crax's hide rippled with amusement. These desperate scavengers had actually challenged the might of the hegemony. Signal the fleet, Crax ordered. Standard battle formation. We'll crush these primitives quickly and return to our scheduled operations. Target their largest ships first and work our way down. This should take no more than an hour. The massive hegemony dreadnoughts began moving into position, their weapon systems charging with deadly precision. But the human fleet did not behave as expected. Instead of forming traditional battle lines or attempting to match the hegemony's formation, the human ships scattered like a school of fish, avoiding a predator. Some accelerated toward the planet, others began flanking maneuvers at impossible angles, and several of the smaller vessels simply vanished from sensors entirely. What are they doing? Vex asked, staring at the tactical display in confusion. The human fleet appeared to be abandoning any coordinated strategy. Ships were moving independently, following no recognizable pattern of military doctrine. Some were accelerating directly toward hegemony positions in what looked like suicide runs. Captain Marcus Rivera commanded the assault ship Defiant, a former mining vessel converted for boarding operations. His crew of 60 Marines had trained for months in the cramped corridors of converted civilian ships, learning to fight in the close quarters that regular military forces avoided. As the Defiant accelerated toward the hegemony flagship, Rivera felt the familiar calm that came before battle. Ramming speed, Rivera ordered calmly. His bridge crew, veterans of asteroid mining operations, worked with practiced efficiency. The Defiant had been designed to crack open asteroids and extract valuable minerals. Today they would crack open a Korth dreadnought and extract prisoners. All hands prepare for boarding action. Remember, we're here to save the Zilani, not to fight fair. The hegemony fleet opened fire with devastating precision. Plasma cannons and particle beams lanced through space, targeting the approaching human vessels. But the humans refused to cooperate with established military doctrine. The Mountain's Pride, built like a space-going fortress, absorbed direct hits that should have crippled her while returning fire with mining lasers powerful enough to cut through hegemony armor. Commander Tanaka led her fighter squadrons in an attack that defied every principle of space combat. Instead of maintaining formation and exchanging fire at long range, the human fighters dove straight into the hegemony formation like diving birds. They used the larger ships as cover, darting between dreadnoughts and firing at point-blank range before disappearing into the sensor shadows of disabled vessels. They're insane, Vex reported as he watched human fighters actually ram hegemony escorts, their pilots ejecting at the last second to be picked up by rescue shuttles. They're treating their ships like expendable weapons. No civilized military would waste resources like this. But the crazy tactics were working. The hegemony fleet, designed to fight predictable enemies, struggled to respond to opponents who ignored every rule of engagement. The Defiant struck the hegemony flagship Dominator's fist, like a metal comet, her reinforced hull punching through the dreadnought's armor and lodging deep in the ship's superstructure. Emergency seals activated, but Captain Rivera and his Marines were already cutting their way through the hull with plasma torches. Within minutes, they were inside the enemy ship, fighting room by room toward the prisoner holds. Sergeant Lisa Park led her squad through the twisted corridors of the Korth ship, her armor's sensors detecting life signs ahead. The hegemony soldiers they encountered were trained for ship-to-ship combat and boarding defense, but they had never faced enemies who fought with the desperate creativity of humans. Park's squad used mining charges to blow through bulkheads, cutting torches to create new passages, and industrial equipment as improvised weapons. Prisoners located, Park reported as her squad reached the ship's detention area. Hundreds of Zilani survivors huddled in cramped cells, their large eyes wide with fear and confusion. Many were injured, all were terrified, but they were alive. Beginning extraction operations. We need transport shuttles at Extraction Point Charlie in 15 minutes. Across the battle zone, similar scenes played out as human boarding parties fought their way to prisoner holds throughout the hegemony fleet. The Swift Justice, a converted police cutter, used her superior speed to dart between the massive enemy ships, evacuating prisoners from transport vessels before disappearing back into the chaos of battle. The research ship Darwin's Dream had deployed scientists and medical personnel who worked under fire to treat injured Zilani refugees. Warlord Krax watched his perfectly ordered battle plan dissolve into chaos. Human ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking where they were least expected and vanishing before his weapons could lock on. His formations were being torn apart by enemies who refused to fight according to the rules. Worse, reports were coming in that boarding parties had reached the prison ships. "Sir," Vex reported urgently, "we're losing prisoners to the human boarding parties. They're evacuating Zilani from 14 different ships. And, sir, some of our crews are reporting that the humans are leaving hegemony personnel alive when they could kill them. They're only fighting to free the prisoners, not to destroy our forces." This information disturbed Krax more than tactical defeats. The hegemony understood enemies who fought for conquest, for resources, for territory. But enemies who fought purely to save strangers were beyond his comprehension. Such behavior was not rational. It could not be calculated or predicted. It made these primitive humans far more dangerous than their simple technology suggested. Admiral Chen coordinated the rescue operations from the Indomitable while simultaneously directing the fleet's assault. Her ship's medical bays were already filling with rescued Zilani, their translator systems working overtime to communicate with the traumatized survivors. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the fleet's chief medical officer, moved between patients with calm efficiency, treating injuries while gathering intelligence about hegemony operations. "Admiral," Dr. Vasquez reported during a brief moment between emergencies, "the survivors are telling us about 3 other systems under attack. The hegemony isn't just conquering individual worlds. They're conducting a systematic campaign to clear this entire sector for colonization. And, Admiral, some of the Zilani are asking why we came. They can't understand why strangers would risk their lives for people they've never met." Chen looked through the medical bay's viewport at the ongoing battle. Human ships continued to dart between the massive hegemony vessels, their crews risking everything to save people who couldn't even pronounce their names. Some of those ships would not return home. Some of those crews would not see their families again. But they had heard a cry for help and chosen to answer, because that was what humans did. "Tell them," Chen said quietly, "that we came because someone needed help, and we were able to provide it. Tell them that where we come from, that's reason enough." The battle raged for 6 hours, a chaotic whirlwind of desperate courage against overwhelming force. When it finally ended, the hegemony fleet had withdrawn to regroup, having lost over. News of the human intervention at Kepler 442b spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within hours of receiving the first reports. Ambassador Tavar of the Altarian Republic stood before the assembled delegates, his feathers ruffled with indignation as he addressed the chamber. "The humans have violated every principle of civilized conduct," Tavar declared to the crowded council chamber. "They have engaged in unprovoked military action without authorization, destabilized an entire sector, and shown complete disregard for established diplomatic channels. This aggressive behavior by primitive Deathworlders threatens the peace and stability of our entire civilization." The synthetic representative, Unit Prime 7742, processed the available data with mechanical precision. Analysis confirms human tactical efficiency exceeded probability calculations by 340%. Their use of unconventional strategies against superior forces suggests either extreme desperation or fundamental differences in risk assessment protocols. Recommendation: treat humans as unpredictable variable in future strategic planning. But while the major powers debated and condemned, something unprecedented was happening in the outer systems. Species that had been ignored or dismissed by the galactic establishment were quietly reaching out to humanity. The Thorian mining clans offered to provide rare metals for ship construction. The Zephyrian nomads shared intelligence about hegemony movements in their territory. Even some members of the Council's client species began asking discreet questions about human protection services. Dr. Elena Vasquez worked around the clock in the medical facilities. Established in orbit around Kepler 442b, the rescued Zelani were slowly recovering from their ordeal, but many carried psychological wounds that would take years to heal. As the fleet's chief medical officer, Vasquez had become the primary human contact for the survivors, and she was learning things about the galactic situation that disturbed her deeply. Admiral Chen needs to hear this, Vasquez told her assistant as she compiled her latest report. The Zelani aren't the first peaceful species the hegemony has targeted. According to the survivors, there have been at least a dozen similar attacks in the past 5 years. The hegemony is systematically eliminating any species that might serve as a moral example or refuge for their slaves. Elder Kethron, one of the senior Zelani survivors, had learned enough human language to communicate directly with Vasquez. His large, compassionate eyes held depths of sorrow that made her heart ache, but also a growing spark of something that might have been hope. Dr. Vasquez, he said carefully, my people have heard the debates on your communication networks. The galaxy condemns you for saving us. Why do your people risk so much criticism to help strangers? Vasquez paused in her work, considering how to explain human nature to someone whose entire species had been built on the principle of universal compassion. Elder Kethran, where we come from, there's an old saying, no one fights alone. When we see people in trouble, we don't ask if it's politically convenient to help them. We don't calculate the cost or wait for permission. We just help, because that's what family does for each other. And as far as we're concerned, anyone who needs help is family. Meanwhile, humanity's response to the galactic condemnation was typically direct. More ships arrived daily at Kepler 442b, not fewer. The merchant captain Elena Rodriguez had returned to human space only long enough to load her ship with construction supplies, medical equipment, and volunteer workers. The luxury cruise ship Stardancer arrived carrying a complete hospital staff and enough food to feed the refugee population for months. Captain Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Mountain's Pride, watching her crew unload emergency shelters for the Zelani refugees. Her ship showed scars from the recent battle, but her crew had voted unanimously to return. The galaxy thinks we're crazy, she told her first officer. Maybe they're right, but someone has to be crazy enough to do the right thing when everyone else is too smart to help. The human relief effort was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. While major powers debated proper procedures and diplomatic protocols, humans simply acted. Engineering teams worked to restore basic infrastructure to the ruined planet. Medical personnel treated anyone who needed help, regardless of species. Children from human schools sent care packages filled with toys, books, and messages of hope translated into dozens of languages. But the hegemony was not idle. Warlord Krax had been replaced by Supreme Admiral Thexvor, a more experienced and ruthless commander who understood that the humans represented a threat to hegemony expansion plans. From his massive command ship, the Iron Dominion, Thexvor planned a response that would crush human resistance and demonstrate the cost of interfering with hegemony operations. The humans fight without honor. Thexvor growled to his assembled fleet commanders. They use civilian vessels as warships, ignore established rules of engagement, and show no respect for superior force. This makes them dangerous but also vulnerable. We will target their weakness, their irrational attachment to protecting non-combatants. Intelligence reports reached Admiral Chen just as the second wave of hegemony attacks began. 3-star systems with significant human trade presence came under simultaneous assault. The attacks were clearly designed to force humanity to spread their forces thin, choosing between protecting their own people and continuing to help the Zelani refugees. Chen studied the tactical reports in her command center, feeling the weight of impossible choices. The hegemony was attacking human freight convoys in the Proxima sector, threatening mining installations in the Tau Ceti system, and besieging the agricultural colony of New Eden. Each target required immediate military response, but leaving Kepler 442b undefended would doom the Zilani survivors to recapture or death. "Admiral," Commander Rourke reported grimly, "we're receiving distress calls from all three systems. The attacks appear coordinated to force us to choose which humans to save and which to abandon. If we split our forces, none of our responses will be strong enough to defeat the hegemony fleets. If we stay concentrated, we lose entire colonies." Chen stared at the tactical display, watching the red icons representing hegemony forces spread across human space like a disease. It was a classic military problem. Superior enemies forcing impossible choices by attacking multiple targets simultaneously. Standard doctrine would require prioritizing the most strategically important targets and accepting losses elsewhere, but humanity had never been particularly good at following standard doctrine. "Send a message to all human settlements and shipping," Chen ordered. "Tell them the situation. Ask for volunteers to assist with defense operations. And send word to our new friends among the Rim species. It's time to find out who else in this galaxy believes that good people should help each other." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every human ship in space volunteered for military service, regardless of their mission or cargo. Mining vessels converted themselves into missile platforms. Exploration ships became scouts and communication relays. Even passenger liners equipped themselves with defensive weapons and prepared to evacuate civilians from threatened worlds. But the most surprising response came from non-human species. The Verdani offered their medical ships to treat human casualties. The Kthari provided fast courier vessels to maintain communication between scattered human forces. Even some members of Galactic Council species quietly provided intelligence about hegemony movements. Though they could not officially support human military actions, Captain Sarah Kim, the scientist who had developed new weapon systems for the original fleet, found herself commanding a flotilla of research vessels, converted for electronic warfare. Her ships used advanced sensors to disrupt hegemony communications and provide early warning of enemy movements. "We're not warriors," she told her mixed crew of scientists and engineers, "but we're problem solvers, and the hegemony is definitely a problem that needs solving." The battles that followed were unlike anything in galactic military history. Human forces fought with desperate creativity, turning every disadvantage into an opportunity. When hegemony fleets surrounded human colonies, civilian ships evacuated entire populations, while improvised defense platforms bought time with suicidal courage. When enemy forces tried to cut human supply lines, merchant captains ran blockades with cargo holds full of weapons and volunteers. Sergeant James O'Brien held the last defensive position on New Eden's primary spaceport, his squad of 12 Marines facing down a full hegemony assault battalion. His weapons were running low on power, his armor was cracked, and reinforcements were 6 hours away. By any rational calculation, his position was hopeless. But O'Brien was from Earth, where hope was often the only weapon that mattered. "Listen up," O'Brien told his squad as Korth warriors advanced through the smoke and debris. "We've got 20,000 civilians behind us counting on us to hold this line. The fleet will be here soon, but until then it's just us. So let's show these bastards what Deathworlders do when someone threatens our people." The Marines opened fire with everything they had, holding an impossible position through sheer determination and the knowledge that they could not afford to fail. The rescue fleets arrived just as the defensive positions were being overrun. Human ships due 6 months after the Battle of Kepler 442b. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed New Harmony station, watching ships from a dozen different species dock at the orbital platform. The station had been built from the remains of hegemony vessels destroyed in the final battle for the system, their metal recycled into something that served life instead of destruction. The final confrontation with the hegemony had come when Supreme Admiral Thexvor attempted one last assault on Kepler 442b with his entire remaining fleet. The battle had lasted 3 days and cost humanity nearly half their ships. But when the smoke cleared, the Iron Dominion was a drifting hulk and Thexvor was dead. The surviving hegemony forces had scattered to the far reaches of the galaxy, their expansion finally halted by an enemy they could not understand or defeat. But victory had come at a terrible price. Chen read the casualty reports every morning, a ritual of remembrance for those who had paid the ultimate price for their principles. Captain Rodriguez of the Mountain's Pride had died ramming her ship into a hegemony command vessel to save a transport full of refugees. Commander Tanaka had led her final fighter squadron in a suicide run to break the enemy formation. Sergeant O'Brien had held his position on New Eden until the last civilian was evacuated, then disappeared under enemy fire. Yet somehow, impossibly, they had won. The hegemony war machine was broken. Its expansion halted, its grip on enslaved populations loosened. More importantly, something new was emerging from the ashes of the old order. Species that had been ignored or oppressed by the major galactic powers were reaching out to each other, forming new alliances based on mutual aid rather than political calculation. Elder Kethran approached Chen as she watched the docking procedures below. The Zilani survivor had aged visibly during the months of conflict, but his large eyes now held hope alongside the ever-present sorrow for his lost people. In his hands, he carried a crystal device that pulsed with soft, harmonious light, a new memory crystal containing the stories of the war and the beings who had fought to save strangers. Admiral Chen, Kethran said in carefully practiced human words, I have been asked by the Survivor Council to present you with this memorial crystal. It contains the names and stories of all those who died to save my people, both human and non-human. We will carry these memories with us always, so that future generations will know what courage looks like. Chen accepted the crystal with reverent hands, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. Below them, Verdani medical ships offloaded supplies for the ongoing relief efforts. Kthari traders brought rare materials for reconstruction projects. Even some Altarians had quietly begun providing technical assistance, though their government still officially condemned human military actions as destabilizing to galactic order. Tell me, Elder Kethran, Chen asked quietly, what will your people do now? Kepler 442b can be rebuilt, but it will take generations to restore what was lost. We can offer temporary homes in human space, but I know the Zilani prefer to live among their own kind. She had been dreading this conversation, knowing that eventual separation was inevitable but hoping it might be delayed. Kethran's expression shifted to what might have been a smile in his species. Admiral, you misunderstand. We have no desire to separate from the humans who saved us. Our council has voted unanimously to request permanent alliance with Earth. We offer our agricultural and medical knowledge in exchange for protection and friendship. If you will have us, we wish to rebuild our civilization as part of the human family. The offer stunned Chen into silence. Formal alliances between species were usually complex political arrangements involving trade agreements, territorial concessions, and mutual defense obligations negotiated over years of careful diplomacy. But the Zilani were offering something simpler and more profound: adoption into humanity's extended family, with all the responsibilities and privileges that implied. Before Chen could respond, Commander Rourke's voice crackled through her communication implant. Admiral, we're receiving priority signals from the Vega system. The Thornian mining clans are reporting hegemony remnants attacking their outer settlements. They're requesting immediate assistance. It was the third such call this week, as scattered hegemony forces continued their predatory activities in the outer systems. Chen sighed, already knowing her response. The human fleet was stretched thin, patrolling trade routes and responding to distress calls across a region of space larger than the old hegemony empire. They were not policemen or galactic peacekeepers by choice, but by necessity. When innocent people called for help and no one else would answer, humans went anyway. Tell Captain Hassan to take the Swift Justice and 2 escort frigates to assist the Thornians, Chen ordered. And send word to the Verdani Medical Corps. If there are casualties, they'll need treatment facilities ready. It had become routine now, this coordination between species that had never worked together before the war. Humans provided military response. Verdani offered medical assistance, Kthari supplied intelligence, and Zilani contributed their expertise in emergency aid and refugee management. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived on the observation deck as Chen finished giving orders. The chief medical officer had been working with Zilani healers to develop new treatment protocols that combined human medical technology with Zilani biological expertise. The partnership had already produced breakthrough treatments for radiation poisoning and trauma recovery that were being shared freely with anyone who needed them. Admiral, Vasquez reported, I've just received a fascinating communication from the Galactic Council. They want to send a diplomatic mission to discuss formal recognition of human territorial claims and military operations. Apparently, some council members are beginning to realize that we're not going away, and they'd prefer to negotiate with us rather than continue condemning us. Chen almost laughed at the irony. For months, the Galactic Council had condemned human actions as reckless violations of established order. Now that those same actions had proven effective at stopping hegemony expansion and protecting vulnerable species, suddenly they wanted to negotiate. It was a perfect example of the political thinking that had allowed the hegemony to flourish in the first place. Tell them they're welcome to visit, Chen decided. But make it clear that we're not interested in territorial claims or official recognition. We're not trying to build an empire or establish political control. We're just helping people who need help. If the council wants to formalize that somehow, they can figure out how to make their bureaucracy support humanitarian action instead of hindering it. Over the following weeks, Chen watched as the informal alliance that had emerged from the hegemony war continued to evolve. The Thorians provided rare metals for ship construction in exchange for protection from raiders. The Zephyrian nomads shared star charts and intelligence about hostile activities throughout the Rim territories. Even some former hegemony slave species began reaching out, seeking assistance in rebuilding their shattered civilizations. But the most significant development was the gradual shift in how the galaxy viewed the concept of intervention, where once the major powers had hidden behind non-interference policies and territorial sovereignty. Younger species began asking why evil should be tolerated simply because it was politically inconvenient to oppose. The human example had shown that sometimes doing the right thing required ignoring the rules that protected the status quo. Captain Sarah Kim had been promoted to lead the new Rapid Response Division, a fleet of fast ships designed to answer distress calls anywhere in the outer systems. Her command included human vessels, Kthari scouts, Verdani medical ships, and even a few donated Altarian patrol craft crewed by volunteers who believed in the mission more than their government's official position. We're not peacekeepers, Kim explained to a journalist from the Galactic News Network, who had come to document the new phenomenon. We're not empire builders or galactic police. We're just people who believe that when someone calls for help, someone should answer. The fact that we happen to be good at it doesn't make us responsible for maintaining galactic order. It just makes us responsible for helping people who need help. The interview was broadcast across the galaxy, sparking debates in council chambers and university lecture halls from the core worlds to the outer rim. Some species condemned the human approach as dangerous vigilantism that undermined legitimate authority. Others saw it as a return to principles that civilization had forgotten in its pursuit of political stability and economic efficiency. Elder Kethron found Chen in her office late one evening, reviewing reports from across their expanding area of operations. The memorial crystal sat on her desk, its soft light casting gentle shadows across the tactical displays and casualty reports that defined her daily routine. She looked tired, Chen noticed, worn down by the weight of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. "Admiral," Kethron said gently, "you carry a heavy burden for someone who claims not to seek power or recognition. The Zilani Council has been discussing your situation. We believe you may not fully understand what you have accomplished.